Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hi. What's up? How you been, everybody? Well, we're back on the air, and I think everything is functioning smoothly once again. Many thanks to Apple and the Apple Store geniuses. They are geniuses, after all, and you should recognize them as such. Address them by their title, I say, out on the street, even if you meet them there. Everything seems to be working well. What's new? Well, I'll tell you what's new. My main logic board, the screen on the laptop, they just replaced the whole thing. I don't know if there was anything wrong with the screen or not. It was dirty. I can tell you that. It needed to be cleaned. I should have cleaned it before I set it there. So they probably thought it was too dirty, so they put a new one on there. So that's nice and neat and clean. And what else is new? Oh, yes, the battery. The battery was failing in the MacBook, and I had no idea. So their diagnostic found that as well. And that's it. That's $603 to get this thing back up and running. And in the meantime, we discovered that the old MacBook Air that I mostly use for emailing on the personal account is on its last leg, so I'll have to take that in. That's separate from this show. I'll probably replace the battery on that, but there's not too much I can do about that one. They didn't update the OS on this, which is a good thing for now because all of my broadcasting software works. I am going to update the OS so that I can stay current. That's going to require a change in the broadcasting apps. And the panel of experts at Netroots Radio. One person. But there's a panel's worth of effort going into this. They've been experimenting behind the scenes with their own broadcasting and podcasting mix so that they have a battery of apps that are tested, tried, and true that will work with the newest, latest, hottest, most amazing operating system on the Mac, which I don't know what they call it these days. I assume it's the Taj Mahal. I have no idea. It's they keep naming these things weird things. I don't know anything about it. I go by the numbers, and they have names. So anyway, we're back up and running. Thank you for your forbearance. Your forbearance, that would be from you from leaving the show forever and never coming back. Thanks for bearing with us. And I'm glad I was able to get a jury-rigged show out to you yesterday. At least there was something to listen to. And, we get to welcome back Greg today. Skype should be working. All of these things that should be great. We should have 2 days to wrap up and catch up on the news. And, where should we start? I don't know. I mean, around here, today, Thursday, March 23rd, 2017, I understand that the House leadership plans to force their Obamacare repeal and sort of kind of replace bill package onto the floor today, despite the fact that they're changing it as we speak in order to try and buy back enough votes to pass the House. And never bet against the House leadership for passing something in crunch time. That's usually a gamble that works, although I usually am thinking of Democrats doing that. It does fail considerably more often than for the Republicans, especially the current leadership, than they do from the what was I saying? It happens more frequently for Republicans than it happens for Democrats, that's for sure. Anyway, they're rewriting this thing. I mean, never mind all the old, remember the old hashtag campaign, read the bill, you have to read the bill before you vote on it. They haven't even finished writing it yet. They might just twist enough arms. I've seen a couple of, I guess what you would call prominent conservatives decide to switch their votes. They get some bone thrown to them or another, and they decide it's worth murdering enough people in my district now to swallow this thing. And then Trump himself, I guess, went to the Hill to sort of lobby for it. They had a Republican conference meeting wherein he told them, if we lose on this thing, It's going to be bad for all of us. If you vote against it and this thing goes down, you're probably going to lose your election in 2018. And he sort of jokingly said, because I'll come after you. And he named out, called out one or two individuals and said, you're in trouble. And then he kind of winked at them. So you can't tell whether he winks or not. You can't tell whether he's being serious. You don't know whether you're supposed to take him literally or seriously or whatever. But he's shown a significant willingness, even during the campaign last time, to go after Republicans that he didn't agree with. Of course, there were those in the primary. But even outside of that, people not running against him, he was willing to take shots at them. And he might very well be willing to take shots at people who vote against, although that will be a lot easier to do. I'll say this. Here's my advice to really worried and upset, nervous Republicans who are genuinely on the fence about this thing. If this bill passes and you vote against it, he will come after you. He will. If this bill fails and you vote against it, I'm not so sure that he comes after you unless something else very much like it passes later. But if this thing goes down as a big flaming mess that it's so radioactive that no one can be anywhere near it and it didn't even pass. It was garbage from the start and it ends up as a radioactive dumpster fire. He may go after you because he's angry at you personally, but it won't work. Now, if it passes, that may be different. It also won't work. I mean, it'll pass and it'll be a disaster. And there is some chance it'll be such a disaster that you'll be better off having not voted for it. But that would be reality, and he's not going to campaign based on that, and a lot of people in your districts aren't going to understand things based on that. That doesn't have anything to do with it. My guess is you're better off in safety and numbers. It's harder, I should say, for him to come after all of you. Plus, it's harder for him to go after anybody if he takes a gigantic black eye right out of the box. So that's my actual, genuine, honest to God, not even trolling you, political consulting advice for you. If you're on the fence, make sure this thing doesn't pass. You have a better chance of surviving Trump's wrath if he is coming after you wounded than if he comes after you as a winner. Does that make more sense? Okay. So we'll catch up on all of those things. Other things we need to catch up on. Gosh, I mean, I have to mention them all. Don't hold it against me if I don't get to the news you're thinking of as the top item. There's so much, and we've been off the air for so long. Another Russian has been killed. Former Russian MP shot dead in Kiev city center. Says here he was testifying against Ukraine's ex-president Yanukovych. So you don't want to be caught doing that. I wouldn't be caught dead doing that. Oh, yes, you would. You would absolutely be caught dead doing. That's how it would work. So I see a photo here of the man, the things they do in the foreign press that we would never do here in the United States. I guess I shouldn't say never. We don't do now. We used to do it all the time. Photos of dead mobsters all the time. Mobsters don't count, I guess. I don't know. There's that. There's the insane terrorist strike in New York City. Did you know terrorists had struck in New York City? If you didn't, then it's because the newspapers are not treating the decision by a wacko white supremacist to travel from Baltimore, was it, to New York City. I think I read he took the bus, which is amazing, and with a sword killed a black man in New York City. And I say a black man. His name was Timothy Kaufman, I think, Caughman. And I see lots of people tweeting around his photo. He's a Twitter user, a regular friendly guy. I mean, it was a random thing. The point is the guy got on the bus with the mission in mind. I'm going to take a sword, which is wow. And I'm going to go to New York City to murder a black man. I say it that way because that was the plan. He didn't know this guy. There's no indication that he did. He just was like, this is something I have to do for whatever reason. I'm a white supremacist and it's not enough for me to just feel superior. I have to go kill somebody. And he went, I don't know what to tell you about it. It's nuts. I haven't read much about the story. And I'm sure that we will, and we'll discuss it a little bit. But the aspect of it that fascinates me is, once again, by the way, we were treated to an extensive description of how dapper the guy was. He was well dressed, as it turns out. So I think ordinarily I'd say punch him, but I guess he'll stab you. But punch him anyway. Now that I don't know. So this is what's going on, and it was pointed out by several people that I saw on Twitter. Just say it correctly. It's a terrorist attack, but for some reason, I don't know. What do you want me to say? Racism. Yeah, that's your institutional racism versus the personal racism of the attacker. There's this institutional bias that grows out of a slightly different kind of racism, but it's race-based nonetheless, that says, a murder's a murder. But it's more than that. The guy is out to send a message, which is, I guess, don't be black, and it's going to be hard to comply. It's a difficult demand he's making. So we'll have to deal with this guy as well. What other news is there? Greg, welcome back. Hi. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing? What's new?
I got the top of my computer is new.
Oh, that's
much
nice.
of the inside of it is new.
People missed you. They were trying to raise some money for you.
They did, and I felt like part of the time away was spent besides scrambling to get everything back up and working. And there were a lot of things that needed to be put back up and working, by the way. It wasn't just the computer. But the computer's the only one that's your problem. Our problem. But I got some good plans, and I think, people did. They stepped up. They made some nice, generous donations, and I think the thing to do is we're going to put together a redundant broadcast system, which will feel like a waste of money until the day one of these things goes down again, and then we won't miss a show. But a nice setup, a Mac that will be sort of dedicated only to producing the radio show.
Yay.
And nothing else.
Yay.
And apparently these Mac Minis can do the task and can do it for about a half to a third of the price of the actual desktop Macs. So they make some nice products out there. So that's what I think we ought to put those contributions to. And we got about halfway there for that one. So, it's going to be in my house. I'll do the other half.
That is absolutely fantastic.
I think it's great. People were sad they missed it. I was sad to not to be able to talk to you, not to be able to talk to Joan, not to be able to laugh at these crazy stories or cry at the terrible ones. I mean, this is part of the
But we're
therapy.
back. Hey, so let's talk healthcare a little bit. There's two big stories out there today.
I heard about that.
One of them is Trump and Russia, and the other one is healthcare. But let's do healthcare first because today's the vote. At least tonight's the vote. At least I'm not sure exactly when the vote is, and they don't either because they don't know that they have the votes.
Right.
As of this morning, MSNBC reports that efforts overnight to get more conservatives have lost some moderates. Now remember, the definition of a moderate is a conservative that's not willing to vote for this health care bill because they care more about their constituents.
Yes. Okay.
Otherwise, there's nothing moderate about them. But in the context here, you have people who are looking at what the overall big health care bill really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's worth talking about.
Okay.
Now, it took Obamacare a year with hearings and all sorts of things, including multiple CBO scorings for tweaks. Finally, it was a huge bill. Finally got done. Republicans howled and complained because they said it was rushed through because it only took a year. I don't know what they were complaining about, but they were complaining. This bill is not only rushed through in weeks rather than months or years, but nobody knows what's in it because it keeps changing. You have one over six of the American economy being rewritten on the fly overnight by people who don't know what they're doing, strictly as a bargaining chip to get this vote or that vote. At this point, nobody really cares on the Republican side what the hell is in the bill. It doesn't matter. If I do this, can I get your vote? If I sign up, all the things that they had complained about for years and years and years with draining the swamp is now in here. And that puts the Republicans in the situation where they still don't have the votes. They're bargaining away everything they supposedly stand for. They are breaking every one of Trump's promises to his constituents about not cutting Medicare and Medicaid, and they're going to do it anyway. And only to fail, because if it doesn't pass, fine. If it does pass, it dies in the Senate. So why Republicans would vote for this and then willingly put an albatross around their neck is unclear. Heritage and Club for Growth and the Koch brothers network are all against this bill. In fact, the Koch brothers network said they're going to raise some millions of dollars to protect any Republican who votes against this bill. So we don't know what's going to happen, and it may be one of those Tom DeLay leaves the vote open for like 3 days. You'll have to tell us about how that works.
Oh, yeah.
Because if it's a real close vote,
you know,
you break all the rules in order to get what you need. And typically what happens is the minority complains about it, and then when they're in the majority, they go and do the exact same thing whenever it suits them.
Yes. You just
I hate to put
just
process in such a cynical light, but that's how process works in the House.
That's largely true. That's it. And as far as keeping the vote open, nothing special has to happen. You just don't bang the gavel. Just stand there.
But how long can you do that? Can you do it to the next day? Can you do that to the next week?
How long can you not bang a gavel?
They stole my gavel.
I could do it all day.
Trump took my gavel. I can't do it.
Yeah, that's basically it. The vote doesn't close until the chair says it's done.
So let me read you some tweets about people following this to give you an idea what's going on here. Matt Fuller, MEP Fuller, on Twitter. Very, very good congressional reporter. One of these guys who's just devoted to congressional stuff. Love following him. And he writes, nobody understands what Republicans are considering changing. Nobody has seen a CPO score about its effects. Nobody cares. He wrote this last night. Vote tomorrow.
Yeah. Usually you're supposed to care.
Well, he's just indicating that at this point it is strictly down to power moves about who can push who to do what.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a balloon. You push on one side and it just pops out on the other side. You get the conservatives to round up by claiming that you're going to do stuff. And some of the stuff that they're going to do is incredible. For example, they're talking about getting rid of EHB, the healthcare benefits that are essential.
Is that what the E is? Essential?
Yeah, essential healthcare benefits.
What else?
EHB.
What else do you need in health care?
Well, Larry Levitt outlines them. For example, ambulatory patient services, emergency services, hospitalization. Your insurance might not cover you in the hospital. It doesn't have to if this thing passes the way they were talking last night. We don't know because we haven't seen the final bill because nobody has. But they're talking about taking away the health care covering your hospitalization.
Yeah.
That'll break you, folks.
That's the one thing that almost everybody, even opponents of Obamacare, points to and says, why I need insurance.
Yeah. What's the point of having insurance if it doesn't do that?
I don't know.
Newborn care, mental health and substance disorder services, including behavioral health treatment. And let me tell you, I just have a special place in my heart for mental health services. But this also includes substance use disorder. So you're also talking about opioid crisis, the thing that got Trump to get all those votes from the rural areas that are supposedly ravaged by this, which they are. And they were going to vote for Trump because he was going to fix it. So what does he do? He's got Trump Care, which is going to take that away. And the mental health services in and of itself are hugely important. We're talking about veterans, PTSD, that sort of thing. Not all veterans are covered by the VA. And so what do you do in that circumstance? So when I'm talking about breaking promises to his constituents, this is what I'm talking about. Prescription drugs. I mean, why should insurance cover drugs? I'll give you the cheapest possible insurance. We'll make it so you can do it across state lines, so they'll all be like in Delaware or someplace where it doesn't have any regulations, kind of like the credit cards wound up. And then we'll offer things that just cover nothing, and it's so cheap everybody will want it. So by doing it across state lines, you'll get to the least common denominator of cheap insurance that covers nothing, and that's one of the reasons why it's such a bad idea. Other things here, rehab and habilitative services and devices. So if you got a walker, those little cars, the carts that are always offered on TV for Medicare people?
Yeah.
You can't have one of those anymore.
What?
If you have regular insurance. And then laboratory services.
How are they going to pay for TV shows?
Yeah, you can't go and you get your blood drawn to see if you have diabetes or anything like that because that's going to cost you money.
That's my whole television experience.
Preventative and wellness services and chronic disease management. And then pediatric services, including oral and vision care, so the kids don't get their teeth covered and they don't get their eyes covered. And yeah, all those people who watch the nightly news at 6:30 with all the commercials for the old people like me, forget it. Everything that you saw on TV ain't covered anymore for you until you hit 65. And that's only if they leave Medicare intact, and they haven't promised to do that, and they're working on trying to cut that too. So, the whole essential health services here is huge. Essential health benefits, EHBs, is a huge part of it, and that's not even all of it. Then the other part of it that they're talking about gutting is something about Title I. And Title I of the Affordable Care Act is essentially, as Larry Levitt from Kaiser puts it, the whole shebang of insurance market rules. And that's the thing about going across state lines and so on and so forth. So they are trying to woo the super conservatives on this. But anybody who actually has to answer to the constituency about what's covered and what's not covered is going to hate this. So Simon Malloy writes, hard to overstate how reckless the White House and House leadership are. All of that howling about 1/6 of the economy, and they're jerry-rigging a health policy on the fly with no firm idea of what it will do. That's the thing. It isn't just that they don't know what the CBO score is going to be. They have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea the consequences of this. They don't care. They're just trying to woo this vote or that vote to see if they can get over the top. Rant over, but it's just, as a healthcare provider myself, absolutely infuriating.
Well, yeah. At this point, what they're trying to do with the changes is it doesn't matter what. Yeah, like you said, it doesn't matter what the outcome or effect of making this change is. It's just I need a vote. If we pass this thing that everybody's looking at, we say we won. If we don't pass it, we say we lost.
Yeah, but help us with this here. This is where your process expertise comes in. So Paul Ryan says, I know it looks terrible, and it does.
Yes.
I know it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, and he doesn't. But here's the thing. If I just get anything whatsoever passed, and then I send it over to the Senate, and the Senate doesn't pass it, it's not my fault.
Right.
And if they do, we go to committee and I can fix everything.
Yeah, you can try. Right.
Could you explain that part of it? The last part about committee?
Yeah. When the House and Senate, of course, vote separately, and they have the ability, if they vote to do so, to amend the bill. Whatever the House sends to the Senate takes up afterwards. It can happen the other direction, too, by the way. No reason that can't happen.
Probably would in this case because this is such a piece of crap from the House.
Well, so when the bill arrives in the Senate, there's plenty of senators saying, I can't pass it in this form. They'll be pressured, of course, to pass something. So this or any bill, the Senate can amend. The Constitution requires that they both agree on exactly the same text in order to present it to the president. If the president signs something that the Senate bill is different from the House bill, that's not a law. That's not valid. The presentment clause, you got to present one clean version that both houses have agreed to in whatever fashion they decide to do their agreeing, whether there's a 60 vote threshold, et cetera, whatever. Both people have to pass the same thing. So what happens is House passes version A, Senate fools around, passes an amendment or two. We can't pass it without this, etc. They pass it. Now we have two separate versions of the bill. The House sends some representatives, and the Senate sends some representatives, some senators, actually. So lowercase r representatives. And you go to a meeting, a conference between the two houses, the purpose of which is to hammer out what will be the single version of the bill that we send to the president. They work only on supposed to work only on areas of difference, find some compromise language, then they write down all the compromises as essentially their amendments to the bill. Again, they send that package of compromises back to both houses. If both houses then say, yes, I agree to these compromises, then those compromises are incorporated into the text of the bill, and it's agreed to, and it goes. So in that conference, you're going to end up making more changes.
Right. And what if the differences between the two houses are really, truly radically different, as is likely?
Yeah.
If you ever got anything to pass the Senate,
then if they cannot get to an agreement, then a number of things can happen. With the conference, nothing. It just stays open, and they say, we can't come to an agreement. We can't do anything. They have some options after that. Sometimes, for a long time, there were no conferences for a number of procedural reasons, and instead they worked things out on the side in private and said, well, if we were in conference, this would be the sort of thing I would want to confer on. And what if instead of having a formal conference and then sending a conference report to both houses, you simply go back and take the bill back up and pass this amendment, and so do we, and then we'll have it right again. If they can't come to an agreement on this bill in a conference, they can go back to the drawing board, start over, copy the text of what they have now, put it down on paper again with a different number.
Right, but there's always the chance that they could come to some agreement and pass something. So really, for anybody who doesn't want this to pass, we're looking at the Senate to not do that. If it goes to conference, the pressures to really get something done are going to be enormous. So I have to also remind our listeners that among the things that are hugely important in Title I that the conservatives are trying to get rid of are such things like a prohibition on insurance denying coverage over pre-existing conditions and a prohibition on lifetime and annual limits. So if you have, for example,
the things they
a
said they
NICU
liked.
baby where you already used up and chewed up hundreds of thousands of dollars, you may not be able to afford insurance for the rest of your life.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Imagine
So, who needs it? Because after all, if you get rid of all this stuff, the whole thing's cheaper. That's
true.
what matters, right?
Right. Yes, they could just say I don't know a bill that just says there's no such thing as insurance, so not only can you not have it, you also can't not have it because
you agree not to pay and we agree not to cover you. It's a perfect deal. Why don't we just sign it now?
Yeah. Just pay. We'll call it a cable television bill instead, and it won't be. There will be no insurance. If we just declare there's no such thing as insurance, the uninsured rate, by the way, drops to 0, and we're all good.
Yeah. So again, the pressures are enormous right now on the House to produce something.
Yes.
And unfortunately, they're not all moving in the same direction because there's also an enormous amount of pressure to produce nothing. And that's why Club for Growth and Heritage Action and threatening to score against any Republican congressman who votes for this. And at the same time, the Koch brothers volunteering to fund and support anybody who votes against it. So we really don't know what's going to happen until this afternoon, but it's just incredible in terms of looking at what's actually in the bill and what they are trying to do and how that fits with Trump's promise to his constituents, who are deserting him over this, by the way. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, a few at a time.
Yep. So it's a big deal. One last piece on healthcare before we move over to the Quinnipiac poll that came out yesterday. Why deductibles would rise under the GOP healthcare plan. Basically, if you offer cheaper premiums, then you have higher deductibles. That's one of those balloon things where you push on one end and then you get it on the other end.
Okay.
And for the this looks like an average. How deductibles could change under the House GOP plan for Obamacare. If you're paying a $2,550 deductible under the GOP plan, you'd have a $1,550 increase. That is to say, you'd have to pay out of your pocket before the insurance would start to pick stuff up, and you'd have to pay $1,500 more. And that's the average deductible for a typical plan in the non-group market.
Okay.
So most of the debate's been about what would happen to the premiums, but you got to consider the deductibles as well. And so for all the crowing about how your premiums would be lower, and it's not even clear that they would be, and that's only really for the youngest patients, it turns out that their premiums may not be lower. It certainly won't be lower if you're older, and the deductibles are going to be higher. So in other words, you're going to get less and pay more. Congratulations, what a great bill.
That is good. I would say the thing to do is when you print the bill for people, not the bill that they're voting on, but when people get their insurance bills, if you move the amount due for your premiums down further on the page, that would probably technically comply. We've made your premiums lower. Yes,
lower down. In fact, there's now a new law requiring that you only read your insurance contract on the floor.
In the basement.
You cannot do it on the table, and you can't do it on the second floor. So
right, and that's why there's not even. We don't even get these bills in the penthouse at Trump Tower.
Right.
We just
You
won't
gotta
pay anything.
renovate.
Yeah, okay.
So here's a March
just literally
22nd,
telling the truth.
2017 poll from Quinnipiac. I love the headline here. Base erodes as Trump drops to new low scores. Quinnipiac University National Poll finds voters say 60 to 35 president is not honest.
Well, that's true.
Two aspects of it. And one of them is going to be, of course, about the whole wiretapping thing and Russia, and the other is going to be about healthcare. But here's what we have today. Trump is at 37. With a job approval, against don't agree with job approval, 56.
Okay.
That's a new low for a Quinnipiac poll, and I think it matches the low in the Gallup poll. Today's job approval rating compares to 41.52 back in March. It's up 7th. And he's losing support among key elements of his base. Men disapprove 43 to 52 compared to 49.45 approval earlier in the month. Republicans approve 81.14 compared to 91.5. White voters disapprove 44.50 compared to narrow 49.45 approval back in March 7th. And disapproval 60-31 among women, 90-6 among Democrats, and the all-important 60-31 against among independents, and 75-16 among non-white voters. The independents really are the ones that move these numbers, but it is remarkable that even the Republicans, he's lost 10 points in this poll. We've had this ongoing long discussion about discussing things with conservatives and Trump voters, and I've tried to make the point over and over, they are not unanimous. There's going to be a core number of voters that will never desert him no matter what. There's going to be a core group of voters that voted for him because he's a racist and because Steve Bannon is a white nationalist. But there's going to be some fringe voters who are not, and maybe it's 10%, and it looks like they are eroding, and that's fine. And I think that that's really our target when we discuss this. Of course, we don't want to ignore our own base. That's much more important to us. But the independents, as they desert Trump, are basically going to doom his presidency. It's already a failed presidency, in other words. It's not going to turn around because he doesn't have any talent. He doesn't have any ability. No. And now he's screwing up a sixth of the economy, and he's going to screw up healthcare. And so I don't see him rebounding.
But something.
Yeah, but something, because Devin Nunes says, oh, maybe I'll just break protocol and I will ignore my bipartisan intelligence committee and run over to the White House and try to defend them from something that somebody told me that I can't show anybody because I don't really have the evidence, that maybe at some point Trump accidentally got mentioned in some of the routine legal surveillance that people were doing, and therefore justifies what he claimed when he said Obama was wiretapping him, even though this has nothing to do with that and he was still lying. But, far be it from Devin Nunes to try to, keep the bipartisan front going. The nice thing about him running over and doing that, by the way, is that it makes it crystal clear to everybody that there's no way, shape, or form he's anything but a partisan hack, and that particular committee, even with the excellent Adam Schiff on it, is not in a position to really investigate Trump. And John McCain looked at that yesterday and said, we need a bipartisan commission. This is ridiculous. The House cannot do its job, he said. And he's absolutely right.
Yes. Well, that's true. They can't do this work, and it's too bad because the Intelligence Committee used to be one of those ones where there was kind of some working together from time to time between Republicans and Democrats, but the guy was on a transition committee, so I don't see.
He refused to talk to Schiff. He wouldn't take Schiff's calls. He wouldn't tell him what was going on. Schiff called him and said, what's this presser about, this press conference? He wouldn't tell him.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
It's outrageous on a number of fronts, not the least of which is he's supposed to be conducting the investigation, and he's
in non-partial fashion. That's what people sent him to do.
And briefing the subject of the investigation on how it's going.
And that's why I wanted to bring that up and throw that in, because now I'm going to get back to the Q poll here and listen to some of these numbers. American voters' opinions of some of Trump's personal qualities hit new lows. 60 to 35 that he is not honest.
Yeah.
55 to 40 that he doesn't have good leadership skills. 57 to 40 that he doesn't care about average Americans. 66 to 30 he's not level-headed. 66 to 30 that he's a strong person. 59 to 36 that he's intelligent. And 61 to 35 that he does not share their values. So people think he's strong, he's smart, but he's absolutely unqualified for this job.
Yeah. And
he's proven it.
Or strong. Yeah. That is weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I just throw in a couple of other comments here, and then I'll get your reaction to it.
Hmm.
Most alarming for President Donald Trump, the demographic underpinnings of his support. Republicans, white voters, especially men, and those without a college degree are starting to have doubts.
Yes.
A total of 73% of American voters say Trump and his administration make statements without evidence to support them very often or somewhat often. And only 25% of American voters say Trump is more honest than most of the previous presidents. That's his base. Forget about that 25. Those are the deplorables.
Yeah.
It's everybody else. 48% say he's less honest, and 24% say he's about as honest. So he's basically lost half the country already. They're not coming back. And of the rest, it's split between the 25% who love him no matter what he does, and the 25% who figure, well, he's not that different from everybody else. But you take away my health care and forget it, buddy.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. It is happening, and I mean we got some anecdotal evidence in addition to the data. The individual stories of people who make up the data has been pretty interesting too. And so good news if you are willing to talk about your Trump regrets. You have a horde of reporters who will tell your story. Yesterday's was CNN, I guess, covering the story of a guy who apparently became known as the Trump Troubadour.
Yeah, the guitar player.
Yeah, guitar playing, country singing guy.
46, I think, 46 rallies he went to.
Yeah, well, 45 is what's 45. Listed here. He's Trump's
we don't want to
45th
exaggerate.
president. Right, you want to get, you trying to be fake news or something? You say 46, 45, because Trump's the 45th president. That's not really necessarily the reason why he stopped at 45, but traveled around the country at his own expense, and not to mention the expense of all the rest of us as well, for having elected this guy. But stand outside these things and sing his Trump songs, his country Trump songs on his guitar. And the basic story of it was he decided that Trump was the guy for him when he started saying we're going to do something in healthcare to take care of all of this opioid addiction and people dying of overdoses, because his son had died of an overdose in 2014. And the story of the day for him was the decision that, I see that Trump now says he's actually going to do the very opposite, and that actually registers with me. It makes me mad, it makes me sad, and it makes me say I don't support him anymore, and here's a television camera, and I'm going to tell him.
Right. And, in fact, it's healthcare that does this, and that does penetrate. We have some policy numbers here from Quinnipiac worth looking at also. So on handling the economy, he's negative 42-48. They disapprove 58-34 the way he's handling foreign policy, 50-42 on terrorism, 54-34 disapproval on the federal budget, which this is supposed to fix, this healthcare mess, and disapprove 60-38 of the way he's handling immigration, which is supposed to be his signature issue. And American voters don't believe, 70-19%, that former President Barack Obama had Trump Tower wiretapped. So the 19% is the absolute bottom core, will never desert him cult figure if he says that Trump is from Kenya, is from Kenya. If he says Obama's from Kenya, is from Kenya.
Trump's from Kenya, though.
Yeah, well, Trump is from some other planet altogether. These are terrible numbers, and they haven't hit bottom. That's the scary part. I mean, we're not even out of the 100-day honeymoon period yet.
Yeah, that's true. We're at about 60-something days. That's pretty early.
Right. So today's a big day because whatever happens with healthcare is really going to have a huge impact on these already terrible numbers. And that's one of the reasons why we're following it so much.
Yeah.
So that's all I got to say about healthcare in Poland.
All right.
He's in bad shape, and the whole healthcare morass, the whole debacle that's playing out before our eyes, just like Devin Nunes running over to the White House, is exposing these guys. And it's making it so that even the both sides reporters are having trouble not saying that, for example, Trump lied about the wiretapping. They're having trouble trying to look at Devin Nunes as a somehow neutral figure that they have to give equal time to. It's making their job extraordinarily difficult, which I love.
Yeah, I'm for that.
Because, this is not both sides, and it's none of those things. The bottom line is that when it comes to governance, and, I've been on this show for a long time with you, and one of our, certainly my key things that I keep saying over and over, these guys don't know how to govern. They don't want to govern. And the governance part of what they do is now under full exposure for everybody to see. And what's happening, they're rushing to fix 1/6 of the economy overnight by making promises they don't really care about. And everybody's going to know it.
Yeah. Well, the Republicans have to show that they can govern. I remember that.
Well, 2018.
Here we go. Okay. Well, it's a good reminder that they can't, and they couldn't before Trump. And Trump is not making it any easier or better.
No, he's making it a lot harder.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I guess the big question on the table for us is, do we call it Trump care or Ryan care? It's certainly Trump care from my perspective, but, as soon as it fails, Trump will turn around and say, hey, listen, that's Paul Ryan. No, don't look at me. I had nothing to do with it.
Yes. Well, that's one excuse.
And Ryan will have no defense.
Oh.
Because by the time this is done, everybody's going to hate him even more than they do now.
That's true. No doubt about that. I'm ready to hate him now more.
Okay, me too. So with that, basically that's the
health.
healthcare side of things. On the Russia side of things, some huge stories came out between the last time we were on the air live and now, including the fact that it really looks from a 20,000 feet, 50,000 feet perspective that Manafort and Flynn, Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, who Sean Spicer claims had almost nothing to do with the campaign. The way God had almost nothing to do with the Bible.
Right.
The way Mick Jagger had nothing to do with the Stones. Right. Is in the crosshairs. And if you had to bet, the bet would be he's going to be indicted. And maybe Flynn too, for being a Russian agent and not a foreign, lobbyist and not registering. So you have people very close to the Trump campaign. Roger Stone is there too. And then the Trump campaign will claim we never met him. I have no idea who Roger Stone is. I don't know who Carter Page is. There's another guy who might be indicted.
Nunes knows nothing about what he's supposed to be supervising.
Yeah, well, he's the leader, and he doesn't know any of these people that he hired to do the great job because he hires only the best people. And so, this is more than just a cloud over what's going on. And we don't have to go back and relive the difference between how Hillary Clinton was handled by the press and others and how Trump is being handled by the press or others. But there is one intriguing part about this. What if, and I think I'm trying to remember if it was Sam Sater who brought this up, what if Comey goes and does whatever he does with Clinton because he already knows that the Trump stuff is really super serious and he's going to wind up bringing indictments later. And he wants to cover himself for being fair by saying, I did everything I possibly could on both sides. And Clinton, we looked real hard and there's nothing there. And with Trump, you guys are going to jail. And don't yell at me for being a partisan because, look, I did everything with Clinton. I even told you about it during the election. That's the current theory that's making the rounds.
Okay.
What do you think?
I will have to wait and see. I mean,
me too.
Honestly, who knows? I mean, I don't think Comey ends up in the dock for this.
No, he doesn't look good though.
But no, yeah, it's not.
I mean, he was sitting on this all this time and didn't tell us. But told us the Clinton stuff.
He's going to have some explaining to do, no doubt.
He basically changed the election results.
Yes.
That's an amazing thing for a single individual to do.
That is true. It's quite so. I don't know how we'll. I mean, he's the last of my.
That is so hard to fathom. That's why nobody wants to really talk about it. But you know what? That's what happened.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we don't want to focus on that one because that's not. Wow. We'll have to wait and get to that after we get to the first level problem, which is this guy is the president.
And his people have been colluding with the Russians to try to screw up our democracy.
Yes.
There's a word for that.
What is it?
It begins with a T, and it ain't Trump.
Huh. You're not supposed to say it because
Benedict Arnold, those kind of guys.
Well, it's pretty big.
Yeah. So that story will not go away, even as we focus on healthcare today. And that's my thanks to David. We're back. Summary for today, just to get things started. A couple of pieces that we left you with over that. We had a nice Wednesday pundit roundup on a bunch of other pieces as well. We'll see. We'll see what happens, and we'll see what happens with healthcare. I expect the vote not to happen until late.
Yeah, probably not. By the way, before you go, I'll tell you one story to watch in terms of what I think we'll see Trump tweet about today.
Yeah, what's that?
News from Israel.
Yeah.
That the Israeli police say they have arrested a 19-year-old Israeli Jewish man as the primary suspect in that string of bomb threats targeting Jewish community centers in the U.S., which means, of course, that Donald Trump will be tweeting that he was right to say sometimes, people do this stuff to themselves, and everybody went crazy. How could it possibly to stand out there based on nothing? Maybe he was hearing intelligence from Israel, maybe not. Maybe he was just guessing and he got lucky. Maybe the Israelis said, what we should do? We should arrest somebody and say he's the guy as a favor to Trump. I don't know, but that's where it stands. A 19-year-old Israeli Jewish man. It says right here, police spokesman, I guess from over in Jerusalem, Mickey Rosenfeld is the name of he has to be named Mickey because he's a cop. Mickey Rosenfeld. Says the suspect is the guy who was behind the JCC threats, referring to the Jewish community centers in the U.S. that have received dozens of anonymous threats in recent weeks. He's from the south of Israel, if that makes any difference to you. Using advanced technology, he masked the origin of his calls and communications to synagogues, community buildings, and public venues. He also made threats in New Zealand and Australia, because why not get the whole worldwide Jewish community, and the investigation carried out with the help of the FBI and police from other countries, which makes sense because we're hearing from police in other countries. That's the latest. So I'm sure that by the afternoon, Trump will be out there saying, see, I told you I was right. And he does this quite often. He jumps to these conclusions about terrorism, which in some cases, we usually acknowledge that could be true, but we should wait and find out. This one, he was pretty out there on and all by himself, and it's really interesting, and I'd love to see how that came to pass, but we'll probably never learn that part of the story. But there's your Trump, not a rage tweet alert, but a gloating tweet alert. I'm sure he'll be in your face about that by tonight.
Yeah, we'll watch for it. At the same time, I'm going to drop Tim Lang Meteor Blade's pundit roundup for today, because there's a bunch of stuff in there which is pretty good about the CNN report about Russia in terms of personnel being involved with collusion. Brian Beutler with the Donald Trump show is flopping. The healthcare bill embraces the GOP's scariest state-level experiments at the nation. There's some pretty good stuff in there. And in these times, writes how the left is using Tea Party tactics to take on both the GOP and the Democratic establishment. So some nice pieces, and I think are worth taking a piece and a look at. Martin Longman, Boo Man, writes in the Washington Monthly about Devin Nunes intending to obstruct justice, and that's just a big piece of what happened yesterday. Just so bizarre. Yeah. So I think all of that is worth looking at. And as counter to the Q poll here, Eric Levitz claims in New York Magazine, and I don't believe it, that regretful Trump voters are mostly a myth, and he's looking at a new poll from Penn State's McCourtney Institute of Democracy and YouGov, which finds only 3% of Trump voters regret their decision, and fewer than 1% wish they had voted for Hillary Clinton last fall, and that's fine. What's more, the poll doesn't find all that much ambivalence among the 97% of non-regretful Trump backers. If you could send a message to Trump what it would be, keep it up or stay the course. First of all, it's too early to look at that and say this is definitive, because when Trump screws up, support drops. We saw that with Nixon. We know that. We know who's his core. We can always already see it in the Q poll. So the idea 60 days after voting for him that all of a sudden Trump voters are going to be regretful, and that's your standard, is the wrong standard. Tell me about it in 6 months, not 60 days. And I think that would be a much more relevant discussion to have. So don't use this poll as proof that what we're saying is wrong.
Okay. I won't.
Okay, good.
I'm busy.
You're busy. You got things to do. So do I. And so I'm going to go and do them. This is Greg Workin speaking with my friend Kagro in the morning, David Waldman, back live. And we're having fun because we missed each other. We didn't have a chance to speak all week. But things are fixed and we're back, and he'll be back tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday. But in the meantime, he's got another hour of the show to do. So
Yes.
let's see what he's going to have to say.
Man.
Take care and watch that healthcare vote, and we'll talk.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Thanks for bringing us up to speed. Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, take care.
Take care. Okay, have a good weekend. Where to go now? I don't know. Let's see. First of all, small technical point. You know, this is huge for me. How do you say Devin Nunes, his name? I've been saying Nunez because honestly, that's probably what it is. It's probably, a Spanish, Mexican, American derivation. He's from California, which is probably Nunez, but he's a staunch conservative Republican, so he can't have Mexican blood. No, because they're not Nazis or anything like that. Anyway, he pronounces it, I guess, in English it's easy enough to erase the tilde and get rid of that Enye sound to Nunez, but he pronounces it Nunes. To be perfectly American, he should say, my name is Devin Nunes. But he says Nunes. I learned that from Elise Foley, who had the similar fascination with the pronunciation of names, and she has a good trick when they are elected politicians. She goes and looks for their television commercials on YouTube and then listens to the disclaimer part where they say, I'm Devin Nunes and I approve this message, or whatever it is. See? So they tell you right straight from the horse's mouth. You can find out how do they say it. And, you should try and say it the way they say it. But I will say, that being the case, I will also footnote it by saying, come on, it's Nunez and you know it and you're hiding from it. But okay. America has a long tradition of allowing people to do that. We'll continue to allow it. I just thought I'd put it on record. So what did that guy Nunes actually do yesterday? Well, besides going over the play-by-play, we have this. I see Kyle Griffin from MSNBC is the last word, tweeting that Senate Intel Committee member Senator Ron Wyden, says Nunes may have revealed classified information. And I think everybody kind of guessed that too. Here's his statement. Representative Nunes' statement. I wonder does he say Nunes or does Ron Wyden say Nunez? I don't know. Maybe they know one another. Anyway, his statements would appear to reveal classified information, which is a serious concern. With regard to the substance of his claims, I have no idea what he's talking about. So there's that, too. Important. And as we know, of course, Trey Gowdy would say you need to spend some time in prison now. That's actually just absolutely illegal. That's what we were saying the other day in our hearing with Comey. And now Chairman Nunes is doing exactly the same thing, except he's doing it as an awesome Republican elected official guy, and I'm okay with it. I started the hashtag yesterday. You should join in. Pardon Nunes. I don't actually want to pardon him. I'm just trolling. I want them to come out and say, well, there's no need to pardon him. He hasn't done anything wrong. And I said, well, just to be safe, don't you think we ought to ask the president to pardon him and walk into that trap? No telling whether that's something he would fall for or not. Let's see. Other things that have popped up this morning that I've opened tabs on for the purpose of telling you about. Let's say we got to the murder of the former Russian MP who was killed in Kiev. There's a link here for the story. It's to Pravda, but of course that would be in Russian, and I can't read that to you. So that's not really helpful. But I'll provide you with the link to the tweet just so you can see this rather startling picture. I guess trigger warning, there's a dead person in it, and he's been shot in the head, and he's on the ground dead and bleeding from the head. And not a whole lot of people appear to be terribly concerned about it. One guy has stopped to see what's going on. Other people are going on about their business in downtown Kiev. Okay, let's see. Other things that I have opened up. This is another thing that many people have been chattering about. It's of interest. I guess another of the put it under the polling shifts and regretful Trump voters. It doesn't sound like this is a regretful Trump voter, but a regretful Republican. Lots of people talking about this one. And I know that Darwin Darko sent a note about this as well. Lots of people tweeting about this one, though, but he took the time to send it directly to us. Hawaii lawmaker resigns from Republican Party to join Democrats. That's the Reuters headline. Where is the note from Darwin? Here we are. He sent me something from Muckraker, the headline being Hawaii Republican leader Beth Fukumoto quits Republican Party over Donald Trump and joins the Democrats. Muckmaker, not Muckraker. See, real Muckmaker, that's and a link to the Palmer report. I've got the Reuters one open here. Both, the facts are pretty much the same. She was ousted last month, as it turns out, as Republican leader of the state's House of Representatives, the minority leader, I assume, because it's overwhelmingly Democratic legislature there in Hawaii usually. Let's read more. She's ousted after publicly criticizing President Donald Trump. She resigned on Wednesday from the party to seek membership as a Democrat. So that will change the numbers in the House. It won't change the balance of power, though. Fukumoto, if I have that pronunciation correct, and I think that one seems pretty simple and straightforward. For some reason I can understand that one. She's 33, the youngest Hawaii legislator to serve as House Minority Leader. She said the divisive campaign rhetoric during the 2016 election convinced her that the Republican Party no longer reflected her political values or the interests of her state's diverse population. She's right. That's great. This election, she says, I saw members of my party marginalizing and condemning minorities, ethnic or otherwise, and making demeaning comments towards women. And she's a woman. So there you go. She said in an open letter of resignation to the Republican Party, she is of mixed Japanese and Irish ancestry, and said she found Trump's comments about banning Muslim immigrants and the possibility of establishing a registry of Muslim Americans to be especially troubling. I wanted very badly to see the Republican Party denounce his comments, and that didn't happen. She told Reuters, saying a Muslim registry struck her as one step away from internment camps, because it is. That, for me, was the issue that really changed how I felt. For others, it's opioid addiction. For her, it's this one. A self-described political moderate, Fukumoto was the first Republican in 26 years to represent the largely middle-class central Oahu district outside Honolulu, capital of the predominantly Democratic state. She said she originally joined the Republicans out of a sense that Democrats were the status quo party, but she gradually grew disillusioned with the Republicans. It's good news that she's made the switch. That's nice. I'm glad that she's up to the task. I saw some video in, I think the piece that Darwin sent had some video. Let me make sure. If that's it, then perhaps it makes sense to include it. Well, there was a video from her, but there was some other video of that I saw from another story. I'll have to see if I can dig it up. Of her addressing a town hall meeting with angry Trump voters there in their Make America Great Again hats, and some of them clearly with some Asian heritage themselves. So, there's disagreement there about whether or not there's a place for them in the Republican Party under Trump. But, she was getting booed at town hall meetings for opposing Trump, and just said, if I can't be a Republican and oppose Trump, then I guess I'll ditch the Republicanism. That's not a hard decision to make. The other story we have not addressed and we got to at least acknowledge the attacks in London yesterday. And I guess they're feeling pretty good about, or the Trump types feeling pretty good about calling that terrorism for whatever reason. Let's see. I've clicked on a story, but it turns out to be just pictures. So let me see if I can get the actual story, because I didn't. No. All right. Just the. All right. Well, I'll just go to the news section and pick something up there. I mean, it was, of course, major news, and so this morning's developments on it, an ISIS connection is claimed. By ISIS. ISIS claims a follower was behind this attack. We'll take a look at the CNN reporting on it, just because that's easy to pick up. Although I probably should have scanned the front page of Daily Kos for what did we decide was the most relevant take. Actually, that's probably not a bad idea to just head over there now and see if there is anything. I'm sure there was something on the attack, as it was breaking news yesterday. So scrolling isn't the easiest thing in the world, and the search function, well, you know how that can go. Anyway, I think for these purposes, maybe CNN's report will be just fine. Oops, there's some video in here, so we'll have to cut that off. So police investigating the deadliest London terror attack in 12 years have arrested 8 people in raids around Britain, and that usually does follow after attacks in Britain. They operate under a slightly different code there. There's lots of raids that'll go down, and people will be arrested all over the place. As an ISIS-affiliated news agency claimed that the terrorist group was behind the outrage, Prime Minister Theresa May revealed the perpetrator was British-born and once linked to violent extremism in a statement to Parliament the day after it was locked down when the assailant breached its perimeter. May said the attacker, whose rampage claimed 3 lives and injured 40, had been investigated by security services but was regarded as a peripheral figure. Authorities did not know he was about to mount an assault, she said. I'm sure they did not. Britain's most senior counter-terror police officer said inquiries were continuing in London, Birmingham, and elsewhere after the lone attacker plowed a car into crowds of people, killing 2 before stabbing a police officer dead in the grounds of the UK Parliament. A tweet from ISIS-affiliated news agency Amaq. I didn't even know that. I mean, I'd heard that they do such things, but who knows what they're called anyway. They said the attacker was a soldier of ISIS inspired by its message. They say that about everybody. However, ISIS has provided no evidence for any direct links to the assailant, whom it did not name. Latest developments listed here. We'll just do the bullet points as they have. The first civilian victim was identified as a teacher, Aisha Frade, I'm guessing. Frade, perhaps. Originally from Spain. It's an interesting name. Injured include 10 nationalities besides British, among them French, South Korean, and American. That's how come we care, I guess, here in America. God, we are bad about that, but okay, I'm no better. The mayor of London, who, by the way, came under rhetorical attack from Donald Trump Jr. via Twitter yesterday, and some believe that it has something to do with the fact that his name happens to be Sadiq Khan. The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, said the swift action of London police had prevented more deaths. The House of Commons reopened after lawmakers remembered in silence the victims of the attack. It's well put. I like the phrasing of that one, very British. Addresses were searched in Birmingham and elsewhere, and a number of arrests were made. Queen Elizabeth II voices her thoughts, prayers, and deepest sympathy for all those affected. Donald Trump Jr. blames a guy with a maybe possibly Muslim last name. Anyway, so that's the basics of it, and I think that's probably all that's necessary, and I don't have any further analysis on that one. We'll just have to watch events and read along as they go on. Okay, let's see. Other things that I have to share. Let's see. Other ones that I opened up. Oh, yes. Right. Well, I mentioned to you our own terrorist attack here in the United States of Timothy Kaufman, the man who was murdered by the crazed white supremacist with a sword. This is interesting. A tweet here that says, white murderer, quite a dapper fellow. 66-year-old black victim, some career criminal. Rather amazing. So there's 2 clips here. One from the New York Post, like their mobile site. Well-dressed suspect in fatal stabbing surrenders to cops. It was like really astonishing. Everybody was amazed that, wow, a murderer is well-dressed. And then I guess, is this from the body of their coverage in the New York Post? It's not entirely clear, but the suspect is believed to have stabbed Timothy Kaufman several times in the chest and back when the two got into a fight near the corner of 9th Avenue and West 36th Street around 11:30 p.m. on Monday. Kaufman, who they note here, who had 11 prior arrests, staggered around the corner to the Midtown South Precinct looking for help. He died hours later after being rushed to a nearby hospital. Interesting that they had to note that he has 11 prior arrests. By the way, the characterization I've seen of him elsewhere was that, well, I guess his own characterization of himself. He's obviously not going to put "I have 11 prior arrests" in his own Twitter bio, but he was a Twitter denizen, and you can find him at Tim Rock 715. That was actually his own Twitter profile. He described himself as not only as a hobby and autograph collector in New York City, and noting that he would love to visit California. That would be cool. He describes himself professionally as a can and bottle recycler, which means, of course, that he would wander the streets of New York picking up the cans and bottles that can be brought in for a recycling bounty, as it were, and you make money that way. I don't know if you make a great deal of money, although he does describe it, says here, I'm a good businessman, and I believe it, and he's, look, is it not an essential service to pick up cans and bottles from the streets? The rest of us walk by. Yeah, there's some money to be made in it. I imagine, though, that didn't make him a popular figure with society types and probably police as well, walking the streets, dragging probably a big plastic bag full of that stuff. And everybody says, instead of saying, look, there's a good Samaritan cleaning the streets for us for no public monetary reward, but rather entirely on his own as an entrepreneur. And after all, it is a public service. But he's a black guy, so he's a homeless, shiftless bum. Let's roust him. Let's ask him for ID. I don't know. I don't know what he was arrested for. Who knows? But of course, when it comes to publicly profiling him, having been murdered, he's a career criminal. And the other guy, who's an actual murderer, well, we don't know that much about him. But boy, was he dapper. Just like that other Nazi dude. Okay, let's see. Other things happening today, other things that I've opened up here. Here's some interesting stuff. On Devin Nunes, noting that, as Greg did earlier, that he claims not to have any idea who's Paul Manafort, who is Carter Page. A lot of people don't know who Carter Page, or didn't know who Carter Page was. If you're an intelligent person versed in American politics and news, as you should be if you're a congressman, you would know who Carter Page is. Certainly you would know who Paul Manafort is. I say, maybe it was. By the way, Paul Manafort, please come into protective custody. I can't think of anybody who's a better free murder target than him. I don't recommend it. I would rather see him brought in for questioning and stay alive. It would be much more important to us to have him alive, as I would say just about almost anybody. But I'm a little worried. I will note we saw our Twitter pal William Wolfram tweeting yesterday. Everything tastes like polonium to Paul Manafort right now. That guy's got to be on the list. With the latest Putin foe dead, and there's been like 2 in the last 2 days, as I recall, or at least the reports of 2 in the last 2 days. You got to wonder. I mean, the people who are turning up dead are people who were helpful in some cases to Putin, not necessarily opponents, but sometimes people who are helpful who he'd rather they turn up dead than they be able to be coerced into testifying against him by the authorities. Paul Manafort, here's the question. Who would really be super willing at this point? If he turns up dead, right? Who wants really badly to really conduct a super thorough, hard-hitting, hard-nosed, hard-charging, damn the torpedoes, let the chips fall where they may, what other cliches can we stick in there, investigation of the death and who did it? They're really pin it on where the blame really belongs. Does the Trump administration, Department of Justice, or FBI, or any of the intelligence agencies, do they conduct this? I mean, would they be willing to conduct an investigation that would lay Paul Manafort's murder at the feet of a Russian operative or Putin himself, if that was what happened? No. I mean, they might be willing to conduct an investigation and lay the blame at the feet. Hillary Clinton did it. I guess they could do that. But an honest investigation, I don't really know. And even opponents of Trump, like, okay, let's say Democrats who are like New York State prosecutors. If Manafort turns up dead, there's a good likelihood he turns up dead in New York. Do they conduct this investigation? Maybe. There are some brave people there. They might want to. Of course, I'm wondering whether they might be thinking, I'll tell you what, I mean, everybody kind of knows that Putin ordered this hit, probably. Do I want to be the one who's out front saying he did in a setting that makes it impossible to ignore? But would I get killed for that? Maybe. I don't know that there's anybody that would be really willing to find out for sure who killed Paul Manafort, which is, I think, among the small section of people in the world who might be thinking, I might think about killing Paul Manafort. Like, I'm not going to say that because I'm not thinking about I'm thinking about somebody else killing Paul Manafort, and I'm worried that they'll think that it's a freebie because nobody's going to want to look too much, and no matter who you are. I mean, even if you're just a guy who Manafort owes money to, or maybe you got in a parking dispute with him, this is the point at which you can say, if I chuck this guy out the window or poison him or, drop a piano on his head, everybody's going to assume it's Putin. They're not going to come looking for me, especially if I'm nobody. I'm going to get away with this one. And they're not going to prosecute Putin. They might round up a Russian mobster who they were looking at for other reasons anyway. This is going to be put to rest by arresting a Russian mobster somewhere, not me. So maybe I'll throw him in a wood chipper or something. Why not? I might get away with it. It's a bad suggestion. Don't follow it. I think it's out there. And so I say, Paul, come in. Talk to the authorities. Let us put you in protective custody and keep you alive till your daughters can straighten this stuff out with you. Speaking of his daughters, I got some stories about them as well. Where were we going to go with this? I was going to head in a slightly different direction. Oh, yeah. Before I do that, Nunes pretends he doesn't know who any of these people are, but more importantly, as chair of the Intelligence Committee, in his statements yesterday and in his surprise about things and his claims about Trump or Trump operatives having been scooped up as incidental captures in these wiretaps because they were talking to others under regular, legal, and fully A-OK on the up-and-up FISA warrants because they were suspected of foreign intelligence activity. And if you're an American and you're speaking with somebody on there, yeah, you're going to be incidentally collected because in order to monitor the conversations of somebody legally being monitored under a FISA warrant suspicion, you got to hear both sides of the conversation. Nunes appeared yesterday to sort of be caught by surprise by the idea that, oh my God, a regular American person about whom we may have no suspicions, and that doesn't really describe Donald Trump, but I'm sure Donald Trump would describe himself that way, but I have suspicions about it. But anyway, I have here a tweet that I think sums it up. Kaveh Waddell, K-A-V-E-H, Waddell, W-A-D-D-E-L-L. Who is Kaveh Waddell? Well, first I'll tell you his tweet, and then I'll tell you who he is. Oh, here we go. I can bring up both at once. It says, covering technology, digital privacy, and cybersecurity at The Atlantic. And so somebody who has reason to be surprised, as I am, about this statement. He says, it was as though Nunes was just now realizing that U.S. persons' info is routinely caught up in FISA surveillance. Remember, he's been around, and now as chairman, he's presumed to know this, but as a member of Congress, he's been authorizing this for a long time. Republicans and several Democrats, lots of them. There's no ducking the fact that there are national security obsessed Democrats who vote all the time to okay this. And there's really no other way. I mean, certainly the idea of you got to have a legal regime in place for dealing with incidental capture of innocent U.S. persons who are on the other end of phone conversations with people that they may know nothing about, but who are also under FISA surveillance. But he's all of a sudden shocked that can happen. And privacy advocates have been talking about that forever. since the inception of FISA, but certainly in the last decade plus since the 9/11 changed everything scare. Privacy advocates and civil libertarians have been talking about the ease with which you can get caught up in an investigation like that or have your private information revealed is a serious concern. Devin Nunes just found this out, and he's chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. All right, and one stop here before moving on a little bit more. Jodi Kantor, who is I'll read you her Twitter bio. New York Times reporter, author of The Obamas, and a CBS contributor, just noting the arrest in Israel. Which is worse for Jews? She says, threats by anti-Semites or this? It's hard to tell. And someone will have to tell me when they first see Donald Trump tweeting that he was right. I would like to note that. And I'm amazed that it hasn't happened yet. He may have tweeted. I don't actually follow Donald Trump. I wait for other people to follow Donald Trump and tell me what he's doing. He doesn't need me. All right. Let's see. Other things to catch up on. Oh, let's see. Monica saying about Nunes. She thought the same thing, but Wikipedia says his family has Portuguese roots. Okay. But even so, I would imagine that would make him Nunez rather than Nunes. But I don't know. Do they pronounce things the same way? Maybe not. But not now. Well, the point here, not Mexican American. Well, Wikipedia says his family has Portuguese roots. I didn't read the Wikipedia page, and I don't know whether they get into it. But I mean, you can have Portuguese roots and still end up Mexican, of course. Way back in the day, when Mexicans or people who would describe themselves now as having Mexican American heritage first came to the United States, i.e. before there was a United States. I lived in California as a Mexican Spanish, I guess, what would we say? What's the Spanish subject back in the, colonial days. They've been living in California since, the 1500s, right? So well before there was a United States. And I guess it's entirely possible that I don't know whether there were any Portuguese settlements in that area. They tended to sort of be at one another's throats. At least that's the way it's taught to us in America in the history books. But maybe not. Or people certainly emigrated from Portugal to Spain and vice versa, and probably among their colonies as well. Anyway, so interesting. So Nunes We'll try and remember that. Portuguese rather than Mexican, although who knows how far back that goes. Interesting point, though. Thanks for looking it up, Monica. Let's see. Where was I going to move to? Gosh, there's so many things. Let's see. We were last on Nunes and the intelligence collection. Yes. Okay. Now I remember where I wanted to go with this. It's a fast-moving world here, people. All right. Let's see. There were at least 2 tweet storms that I grabbed. One was about Russia, and one, I think, was... they're both sort of about Russia, but one was... yes, there was another one from Susan Simpson. There we go. Oh, Paul Manafort. There we go. Stream of Consciousness Radio. Sometimes, the stream dries up occasionally. But you remember Susan Simpson, who tweets as The View from LL2. I've always found her tweet storms to be very interesting. Sometimes confusing and confounding, but I think we usually end up circling back around to the facts as laid out and the thoughts she's had on those facts. This time on Paul Manafort, because Manafort in the news, not just for his Russia ties, but also has been very interesting. Manafort's got, I guess, at least 2 daughters. I don't know if he has any other children. But the telephone or cell phone text conversation between 2 of them has been hacked and revealed. And I think what happened was one of the daughters' phones was hacked, and one of the conversations that came out was her with her sister, and another is her with a friend of hers complaining about, all sorts of things. Susan Simpson got a hold of this one and notes that back in September is when this happened. Manafort's daughter had her phone hacked and her text messages were posted online. One thing they showed was that someone purporting to be Lyshenko, the Ukrainian politician / journalist, had texted her asking her to pass on a blackmail threat to her dad. I have read this. I don't know if we read it on the air at some point. I don't know if Susan was the source of it, but I remember it, and I don't know whether it just made it to Pocket and never made it on the air, but it's out there. Screen cap of the text conversation, I guess, is here. And it says, I need to get in touch with Paul. This would be the person claiming to be Lyshenko. I don't know about the first name. We've mentioned her before, though. Him before. I need to get in touch with Paul. I need to share some important information with him regarding Ukraine investigation. How is it that he's texting her? I don't know. I don't know what his daughter does. He says, I actually have proofs, that's what it says, that he received money. And remember, I guess by September, we had already heard in public, in the news, Manafort was out as campaign manager because we knew he was getting money. But okay, this is the text that goes on. I actually have proofs that he received money. If I don't get any reply from you, I am going to pass it on to the FBI and Ukrainian authorities, including the media. Tell him he has 24 hours before I leak all the S to cops. I mean, this is just straight up. This isn't him relaying someone else's blackmail threat. This is him saying, I'm blackmailing your dad. Please tell him. Tell him he has 24 hours before I leak all the S to cops. As soon as he comes back to me, I will pass you documents. And I guess then there's a document, not attached, but that follows. And here's what it says. This is pretty wild. Just right from the beginning. Honorable Count! Exclamation point. What? Like, is he Count Lyshenko? Like the old feudal title? I don't know what that's supposed to mean. At the time of my investigation, it says, I have discovered bulletproof facts regarding this person, Ukraine resident, whose signature is inside the Yanukovych accounting book and who was responsible for rendering assets to you personally for your consulting services during organized meetings. One of such meetings with, this is misspelled, Donald Trump, but Donadl is what it says. One of such meetings with Donald Trump took place on 6/17/2012 with close Yanukovych affiliate, Governor of Cherkasy, Mr. S. Tulub. Considering all the facts and evidence that are in my possession, and before possible decision whether to pass this to NABU or FBI, I would like to get your opinion on this and maybe your way to work things out that will persuade me to do otherwise. That's a nice, subtle kind of blackmail as opposed to, I'll send all this S to the cops. I think you and Mr. Trump will work out a way to solve this problem of yours. Otherwise, official investigation that will be reinforced by the facts that are in my possession will reach also the federal government. With all respect, Sergey. And is that Lyshenko or I don't know. It's very familiar. Sergey. Just Sergii, by the way. You can reach me at my iMessage. It's encrypted. Yes, at Lyshenko@mail.ru. We don't know if it's really him, but okay, there we go. Oh, by the way, I see another tweet of another dead person on a sidewalk in Kiev, this time tweeted by Free Ukraine, or Ukraineolution, like Ukraine Revolution, noting it is very convenient for investigators that the assassin of the other dead guy on the sidewalk, Voronenkov. It's very convenient for investigators that Voronenkov's assassin died with all the documents on his person to properly identify him, quote unquote, identify him. The intrigue. Pretty amazing. I don't know what to make of it, except that a lot of people are turning up dead. Paul, please get off the streets. Get out of Trump Tower. There's no safe place for you in there. The place is full of Russian mobsters. It's the last place you want to be hiding if you are key to nailing part of the Putin network. So get the hell out of there. All right, back to Susan Simpson's tweet storm. It was probably Lyshenko, she says, although as far as I know, he's denying that. But the email in the text can be used to reach him. If you want to email him, Lyshenko@mail.ru. That, according to a Politico story linked here, titled Manafort Faced Blackmail Attempt, Hacks Suggest. And I think that's sitting in pocket somewhere, and we probably never read it. And maybe we should, depending on what Susan can tell us about it. Maybe she can shorten the process. Oddly, she says the hack occurred almost immediately after the blackmail text was sent. I'm not sure if any connection there has been confirmed. Is it the hack of her phone? The daughter's texts showed that in August, when the Ukrainian Black Ledger first broke and Manafort resigned as Trump's campaign manager, she was telling people his apparent departure was just PR and he was still involved with the campaign. And here in a link to a post at Jezebel.com, but there were plenty of sources noting that. And remember, that was very typical of the way the Trump campaign worked. Despite, well, I would say it's important to keep that in mind because of, not despite the denials, but because of the denials from the Trump White House now that Manafort, he played a very limited role. They're trying to distance themselves from him. But, Lewandowski was supposedly fired as the campaign manager, but he stuck around and was, by the end of the campaign, even while he was being paid by CNN, he was being spotted all the time, coming off of the Trump plane and showing up at meetings. I mean, it was ridiculous. Same thing with Manafort. He's fired, but the guy lives in Mos Eisley, Trump Tower, and who knows what kind of access he had to the campaign and to Trump himself. And here is the hacked text messages from Manafort's daughter saying, yeah, his departure from the campaign was all a sham too, just as it was for getting rid of Carter Page, just as it was for getting rid of Corey Lewandowski, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what did Jezebel write about it? This clip that she includes here. That puts Manafort's stint with the campaign at a solid 4 months, at least according to what's been made public. But according to leaked texts allegedly hacked from the phone of his daughter, Andrea Manafort Shand, Manafort's resignation was all for show, and he continued to wield influence in the campaign. Lots of tweets, by the way, also being recirculated from other people connected with the campaign and observers of the campaign, talking about how integral to the campaign and the win that Manafort really was. I think Newt Gingrich among them. Anyway, on August 19th, when Paul Manafort officially resigned, the allegedly hacked texts showed that Manafort Shand wrote to one of her contacts this quote: "So I got to the bottom of it. As I suspected, my dad resigned from being the public face of the campaign, but is still very much involved behind the scenes. He felt he was becoming a distraction, and that would ultimately take a toll on the campaign." Jezebel continuing here. Several hours later, a different contact appears to have texted Andrea Manafort to say, "Thoughts go out to your pops. I can only imagine that he's relieved, angry, hurting, a combination of a lot of emotions. Wishing you and your fam the best." To which Andrea responded, "Ha ha ha, you're so silly. It's all just PR." Now back to Susan Simpson's tweets. Spicer has been trying to push the ridiculous spin that Trump's campaign manager had only, quote, a very limited role for a very limited amount of time, unquote. And in light of that, with the caveat that Manafort's daughter may not have had the whole story, there's another exchange that seems important. But she thought it was Manafort who hired Bannon and Conway as his replacement as campaign manager, and that he personally interviewed them. That, I think, has not come from anywhere else. I think the narrative we had before was that Conway and Bannon were Rebecca Mercer hires, or at least under her influence. And that makes a great deal of sense because she's worked with both of them before. Conway also happened to be the resident of yet another Trump building, the Trump World Tower outside of the UN. Not Trump Tower, but since we're talking about the many Trump residential towers out there, I think that's interesting. And Bannon, of course, Bannon basically, Mercer is just his patron. He, the narrative I am sticking to with Bannon is he is now White House like senior advisor or whatever, and everybody, well, I was going to say everybody accepts that. I mean, we don't accept it, but Republicans accept it because they think he's the political genius that made the campaign happen, that won the campaign. Even it might have been Manafort, but and we believe that about him because look, he's got this string of like out of right field, I guess we'll say, amazing successes where everybody thought that he was just this fringe figure that just had no connection to reality, but he's proven right time and time again, and he's winning this thing, and he's yada, yada, yada. He's doing all these fantastic things, and he's a political genius. But as it turns out, it's all just basically, I'll just take giant chunks of Mercer money, and you can make almost any piece of crap look like a fantastic success if you spend enough money on it. So Clinton cash, it ended up being a smash with the press because they all ran with the story, and it doomed Hillary Clinton in her campaign because everybody was always constantly hanging on to, well, you know, by now the old cliche, but her emails. And that all came from the Clinton cash narrative. And that, I mean, people might have been inclined, reporters might have been inclined to believe that stuff anyway. They didn't need any extra urging from this book and later movie to do it, but it didn't hurt that they were being sent this stuff and sent excerpts from Clinton Cash that they could very easily turn into stories and feed that narrative. And that certainly would have happened without any tremendous amount of money being invested by Rebecca Mercer, or people would have believed that stuff or made up that story. But you can't publish it as a book and produce it as a movie and have a PR budget and make sure that it ends up in the inboxes of all the right reporters and therefore bubbles up into the mainstream media eventually, unless you're willing to put a fairly significant amount of money behind it. It's not money that you or I couldn't possibly get a hold of, but you and I, we'd have to sell assets and possibly bankrupt ourselves to do this. Whereas for Rebecca Mercer, it's just shake out whatever's in the couch cushions, I guess. And that, and we've talked about Cambridge Analytica being the same sort of thing, and all the things that are supposed to show that Bannon is political genius enough that we should not be questioning why he's here. We should, I mean, if you want to question why, well, why is he a Nazi? And why are we listening to a Nazi? There's that. We ask that question, but Republicans don't. They say he's a hard-nosed political operative who for a long time labored in the wilderness, and we all thought he was crazy, but he's proven it to us now. He's had his finger on the pulse of America all this time, and we should be listening to him. And it might just be a veneer that the Mercers purchased for him. I will take these lumps of crap that he produces and spin them into gold, and then we'll say, look at all this gold. Of course he should be at the pinnacle of his career. Anyway, let's see. We have also well, I guess we should continue with Susan Simpson's tweet storm here. So Manafort's daughter, it turns out from the text, seems to think that it was Manafort who hired Bannon and Conway. That's news to me. So here's the exchange as it's transcripted out here. Manafort's daughter saying, I'm not connected to my dad at all, and yet this still seems to be affecting people's judgment of me. This is her crying to a friend that my maiden name is Manafort and people treat me badly because of that. And I'm sad about that. So her friend is consoling her. Are people bothering you about it? That's so rude. And Manafort says, it's total BS. The total is in all caps. But also I was winding up to say, you know the word she uses, but we say BS. It's total BS. My dad This is funny. My dad was never laid by the Ukrainian government. And the whole reason this is even news, that is news, is because we know for a fact that Hillary hired someone to go, and there's, what was it? Here we are. We have to blow up this tweet so we can read it all. Hillary hired someone to go over to Ukraine and stir the pot and get this in the press. Wow, that's something to believe. Because apparently politics has no rules. That's an amazing thing for a Manafort to say. And then she comes right back, by the way, and says, asterisk, by the way, never paid by the Ukrainian government. Although, you got to check. I mean, Trump did P-Gate, so maybe Paul Manafort was laid by the Ukrainian government. I don't know. Anyway, she then continues to say, yeah, I was just asked questions about my connections to my dad by the hedge fund I interviewed with. Now, just time out for a second, right? She's crying that she's being treated badly because she's a Manafort and Manafort's connected to Trump. And she's not even connected to her dad. How dare you? And here's the friend says, are people bothering you about it? That's so rude. And I guess the assumption is dirty, filthy Democrats are approaching me on the street and bothering me about it. No, you were interviewing for a job at a hedge fund, and the dirty, filthy Republicans at the hedge fund asked you about it. Oh, they could be dirty, filthy Democratic hedge fund people. But why were you interviewing with them? I'm sure you could find a Republican hedge fund to interview with. No? They asked her about it in the interview. Boo-hoo. By the way, it's absolutely Republican labor and whatever other public policy that a private hedge fund could absolutely ask you any goddamn question they want, no matter how personal, and they're not going to be of any help to you on that one. Just thought I'd point that one out. And it's your doing, and your dad's doing. Fine. Anyway, so that's who was asking her about it. Boo-hoo. The friend says, I know, sweetie. They're friends, right? She's supportive. That's nice. I think you'll be okay as long as Devin, I don't know who that is, really emphasizes that you are not connected paper-wise to your dad, but you have personally distanced yourself. Manafort's daughter, Andrea, then answers, logically is one thing, emotionally is another. I'm so upset. I hate politics. I want nothing to do with them. And yet they are ruining my life, which is sad and all, but your dad is ruining a lot more lives with the politics. So sometimes it comes back to bite you. Maybe, I know you're not supposed to be related and you shouldn't have to suffer the consequences of what he's doing, but maybe you should be angry with him about this. Regardless of what fallout lands on you, just like with Gorsuch we were discussing yesterday, if you happen to listen to the program, it's falling on you. Be a better person and a better political player, Paul Manafort, if you don't want your daughter to suffer this way. On the other hand, you could be doing all the right things, and certainly opponents are going to take it out on your daughter anyway. I mean, we've seen that happen. No doubt about that one. Okay. Well, anyway, let's continue on with this exchange because it's kind of interesting. I hate politics. They're ruining my life. The friend says, I know it does. I can't imagine, and I feel awful for you, but anyone that works with you, is friends with you, or has simply just met you knows how professional and something, and they don't blow up this response. So I don't know what other flattery there is. Now that he has been essentially demoted, I think this will blow over and lose steam. It's already out of the headlines. Yeah, politics are the worst, and this election is one for the books. This is what our friend says, and that's understating things. I'm sorry you got to deal with all that mess. I feel like the Ukraine stuff will go by quickly. Wrong. And at least you can say your dad was trying to make Trump's campaign more professional. An interesting angle. Manafort's daughter, Andrea, answers, it's just so unfair. These flashy headlines, and then 23 paragraphs in, it's like, oh, but there's no proof. And what's more, that somehow it trickles all the way down to me because I come from the same bloodline. Then she says, he hasn't been demoted. That's total BS. No surprise that the media is wrong again, but of course you were hiding it from the media. You told the media he's out. Oh, he was lying. See, they got the story wrong again. Whatever. My dad hired those two people, Bannon and Conway, interviewed them in Trump Towers. Again, well, one, that's news. But again, for me, what that confirms is if you live in Trump Tower, there's no way to tell whether you're out of Trump's circle or not. the cameras are down in the lobby. They tried to monitor who came in, and they did an admirable job. But if you're already inside and above the lobby level, Paul Manafort, he's out. He's got nothing to do. He's got a very limited role. He's out now. We have new campaign managers. Yeah, interviewed by Paul Manafort, which we would have known in a perfect world, or you wouldn't have been able to hide Manafort arriving after being fired at Trump's offices and then followed by Conway and Bannon, and we would have been able to piece this together, maybe. But anyway, very interesting. And very interesting that she's angry about the press getting it wrong, even though you hid this from us. I'm not in the press. But anyway, I find that very interesting. So that's an interesting development, too. Let's see. Is there more to her tweet storm? No. I just think that, 7 more replies. I can't tell. Oh, yes, there are. Sometimes there are replies from others. There's more. Ready? It should be pretty easy to confirm at least whether or not Manafort interviewed them for the job. If so, I'm sure Spicer would have some exciting new spin to explain why Manafort got to choose or help choose the new public face of Trump's campaign. That's the end of the tweet storm. Lots of reaction to it, but I wanted to put that one out on the record. We're going to sort of have to mentally connect those dots. I need that information out there. I think that's really interesting. We might just have to leave it at that and say, okay, as this plays out and they continue to try to distance themselves from Manafort, you will have this grain of salt to take that with. Now, let's see. In the closing couple of minutes here, we've got a couple other issues to attend to. I know that there probably are a lot of questions about this, given that they will be voting on the health care bill today in the House. There's been a lot of questions about whether or not some of the most egregious provisions of the House bill can survive the Senate process. Specifically, of course, the use of reconciliation and the Byrd rule. Will the non-budgetary aspects of the health care bill, which are very important particularly to the conservatives in the House and Senate, will they survive the Byrd rule and reconciliation? And lots of speculation about, won't Republicans just want to overrule the parliamentarian? And there's a bit of an exchange here on Twitter between Stephen Dennis, who is a Bloomberg reporter who I follow and I think is very he's always up to date. He's very skilled. He understands process. Bloomberg reporter for the covering the Capitol, and he tweets an hour ago, here's an irony of the Freedom Caucus / Ted Cruz strategy on the Affordable Care Act. They want to declare Byrd okays repealing insurance regulations, in part because they fear a Democratic president later could restore what Tom Price's pen erases. That is, if he does it at the regulatory level rather than passing legislation that repeals, in this case, one of the things that they want to do, repealing certain insurance regulations. But a more permissive Byrd bath, as they like to call the process of running a proposed reconciliation bill through the Byrd rule, a more permissive Byrd bath means a future Democratic president and Democratic Congress can restore, with 50 votes and a vice presidential vote anyway, and potentially much, much more. So here's the question. What people are asking about both the insurance regulations and about certain other aspects of the bill. Can Republicans in the Senate, as Ted Cruz and the Freedom Caucus in the House advocate, essentially nuclear option the whole Byrd rule and simply say, the parliamentarian says this does not pass muster under the Byrd rule, but we say it does anyway, and overrule the parliamentarian? And here, Benjamin Adams, just following Stephen Dennis's conversation here, asking, doesn't the parliamentarian have the final say? And why isn't this person on Twitter? There's no chance the parliamentarian is going to discuss this on Twitter. They don't discuss this stuff in public ever. And Joan tweets or chimes in and says, no, she can be overruled by a majority vote. And she's right, but also Stephen is right in answering this way. You would have to engineer this thing. Stephen's right in saying, well, it takes 60 votes to overrule a Byrd ruling from the chair. That is to say, so if the parliamentarian says this does not pass muster with the Byrd rule, it's out. And somebody says, I appeal the ruling, and the chair, the presiding officer just relays that and simply says, it is in fact in violation of the Byrd rule. This is out. For somebody to overturn that on a straight vote, a straight appeal of the ruling of the chair, it would take 60 votes to do that. Why? The answer really is because it's rooted here. You can do one of two things. If something violates the Byrd rule, you can move to waive the Budget Act and the Byrd rule with it with respect to that particular provision. You can say, I understand that it violates the Byrd rule, but I want it in the bill nonetheless. And if you can persuade 60 senators to waive the rule for the purposes of this particular inclusion, then they'll waive it. And so, as an analog, if you, instead of saying, well, okay, I propose that we waive the budget rule, instead say, well, I appeal the ruling of the chair, which would have the same effect as voting to waive the rule. The rule says, okay, you can do it that way, but you would need 60 votes in order to do it. You can't simply get around the requirement of 60 votes to waive the rule by making the vote instead a vote to appeal the ruling of the chair. And that's a great way of handling it. But in a nuclear setting, I believe it only goes so far. If the vote is on a different angle, you can make it work. That's one of the true beauties of the nuclear option and the way it was actually executed the first time in 1975 during the rules fight at the beginning of that Congress. I don't remember which Congress, the 1975 would have been. It's like the 95th Congress, something like that. All right. Well, anyway, here's what you would do. Here's how you could get around it. Stephen's right. It takes 60 votes to overrule a Byrd ruling from the chair. Joan is right that this can all be undone by simple majority vote. And here is, how can we describe this? Here's how it would do. The parliamentarian would clearly say this violates the Byrd rule. It does. She's right. And she's not going to give bad information. They can try and make her do that. They can threaten her with firing her. They can fire her and bring in somebody else on the condition that they just rule the wrong way. There is that. And I mean, one thing you could do to just get this through is if the parliamentarian would agree with you, or you could find one who would, then you just say, well, okay, it doesn't violate the Byrd rule. And then you don't need any 60 votes and it works. And you just keep firing parliamentarians until you find one that'll do it. You probably only have to do it once, because when you're interviewing the next parliamentarian, you say, here's the key to the job. It's yours if you will be willing to say when you take office that this passes the Byrd rule. So, absent that, parliamentarian says this is not pass muster with the Byrd rule and advises the chair as such. The chair has two choices. Listen to the parliamentarian and rule, and then see what happens, and say, sorry, this violates the Byrd rule. This provision, for now, is out, pending any action to waive the Byrd rule or overrule the chair. Or the chair can say, I heard what you said, I just don't think it violates the Byrd rule. And then, if the chair says, either I heard you or I misheard you, or whatever they are willing to say, we rule that it's not in violation of the Byrd rule. And then everybody says, on the Democratic side in this case, says, what? We know the parliamentarian just said that it violates the Byrd rule. She doesn't hide it from the minority. She tells everybody. She doesn't get on the floor and say it, but it's a decision that's made available to everybody. So the Democrats will be on the floor knowing that the actual ruling in this scenario is this provision violates the Byrd rule. So says the parliamentarian. If the chair just simply completely loses his mind or does it on purpose and says, no, it doesn't. And the Democrats say it absolutely does. We appeal the ruling of the chair. Now, at that point, the question is the chair right in ruling that this doesn't violate the Byrd rule? And it's no longer a question now of essentially waiving the Byrd rule. It's a question of, is the chair's interpretation of the Byrd rule right? And I believe that is a vote that can be won with just 50 votes. I don't think you're going to need 60 votes to overrule the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian isn't a member of the Senate. It would take 60 votes to overrule the chair saying this does violate the Byrd rule. I don't think it would take 60 votes to overrule the chair saying it doesn't. Furthermore, you don't even really have to wonder about that because the chair rules that it doesn't violate the Byrd rule. The Democrats say, duh, we just heard from the parliamentarian that it does. I appeal the ruling of the chair. And McConnell stands and says, I move to table the appeal. How many votes does it take to table the appeal? 51. Majority. Simple majority. The appeal being tabled, the only thing left standing is the ruling from the chair that it doesn't violate the Byrd rule. That's how you do it with 50 votes. I hope they're not listening. But if it happens, you'll understand it, maybe, and be able to explain it, maybe. Sometimes just saying it doesn't necessarily mean anybody else understands it and can explain it. I learned that from my kids. But you can point them to a podcast that did explain it, and we'll see whether it sinks in with anybody else. Do you get it? Does that make sense to you? I'm going to have to jump into that conversation afterwards. I can't type and do this thinking and speaking on the fly at the same time. But there you have it. That's why you're here, to learn this stuff before anybody else knows it. Okay, let's see. Other things that we need to cover. Update, a report from Ed O'Keefe at the Washington Post. Schumer, that would be Senator Chuck, says Democrats will filibuster the Gorsuch nomination. That saves me the task of reading you the Politico article about Democrats considering making a deal on the Gorsuch nomination. But for background's sake, I'll tell you that that's the case, that was published. If you didn't hear it, I will give you the basics of it if I can. Where the hell is it? I feel like it was right here. Where did I put it? Where did you put it last? All right. Well, it was in Politico, and I thought I had opened it and then pocketed it. And maybe if I refresh Pocket, will it pop up? I don't know. Anyway, here's the basics of it. I believe it was Politico reporting it, and the deal that was in the offing. Is it here? Dang it. Anyway, the thought process was, maybe Democrats should make a deal. If McConnell will promise us, and there's your problem, you're already screwed. Don't do it. If McConnell will promise us not to use the nuclear option on the next vacancy, should it come up during the Trump presidency, and should it be a liberal seat that's been vacated, and so therefore a conservative appointment would change the balance of the court. After all, remember the reasoning goes, Gorsuch is replacing Scalia, so that might not change the balance of the court as terrible as he is, or as much as it should have changed the balance by allowing Merrick Garland to sit there. That's the thinking. And they're worried about the possibility of the nuclear option eliminating the filibuster on the Supreme Court nominations for a second ultra-conservative appointment at some point. If McConnell will promise not to do that, and he might, And he might even honor that, to be sure. I mean, there have been, the Gang of 14 agreement, it held for a while, but it was only good for one Congress. Anyway, if McConnell will promise that, maybe we should let Gorsuch through. That was the deal being contemplated, but apparently, thankfully, that's off the table. That wouldn't have been a good deal. Don't trust McConnell. He is not necessarily in control of things. I remind you, before the election revealed Ted Cruz to be such a doofus, we used to believe, and it could be the case again very quickly now that he's back in the setting of the Senate, that Cruz makes it impossible for even an honorable McConnell, if that McConnell still exists, to make deals. He doesn't speak for his caucus, his conference. And Ted Cruz pulls the rug out from underneath him all the time. There were a lot of times that McConnell went to the floor thinking he had a deal and was undermined by his own team. So anyway, here's the news. The Washington Post reporting Senate Democrats will filibuster the Gorsuch nomination. Seems like an easy call to me because I'm not there. But good news nonetheless, and that will make a lot of people feel much, much better. It was very testy last night and this morning as progressives, rank and file progressives, began to hear that this was a possibility in the minds of some Senate Democrats. And I'm sure there are some who wish that that was the case, who said, you know what, don't even call me. Certainly don't call me for money at this point. There's no point in backing these guys if they're going to back down from the deal. The news says the opposite is happening. That could change. I don't know. But Ed O'Keefe, Robert Barnes, and Ann Marimo are reporting that that's where it stands. As the Senate Judiciary Committee was hearing from witnesses for and against Judge Neil Gorsuch, his Supreme Court nomination was delivered a critical blow. Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer of New York said he would join with other Democrats in filibustering Gorsuch, a move that would require at least 60 senators to vote to end the debate on the nomination. Now, I don't know whether there's more language down here. I don't know if we're going to get to it. This right here says Schumer will help out with the filibuster, but does he have all the Democrats? Because that's what he's going to need. Republicans have vowed to change Senate procedures if Democrats do filibuster in order to be able to quickly confirm Gorsuch, but Schumer suggested they should focus instead on Trump's nominee. If this nominee can't earn 60 votes, a bar met by each of President Obama's nominees and George Bush's two last nominees, the answer isn't to change the rules, it's to change the nominee, he said. And a good point and a good spin. I like it. Gorsuch was unable to sufficiently convince me that he'd be an independent check on Trump, Schumer said in the Senate floor speech, and I'm sure it is on a number of minds. One, that he was just unanimously reversed in a Supreme Court ruling, but that does happen from time to time. I'm not that concerned. It was funny, but I don't know how telling necessarily by itself. But more to the point, I think, with people having this, well, to be honest, it comes back to the Russia investigation. With that looming, should this president be naming a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court? That's another angle you can take on it. Well, the good news is that Schumer is on board with the idea of a filibuster. I don't know whether that necessarily means that, let's say, Joe Manchin is or Heidi Heitkamp is, but, well, they need 8. And I don't know if they're going to get it that way. Here's Manchin quoted down here. If the Senate goes to a 51 vote threshold, I'm not really sure who wants to be in the Senate at that time or what's the purpose. Let's see. It says moderate Democrats facing pressure to support Gorsuch have said they are hoping both parties can come to an agreement. So no word really on where they are on that. But we can afford to lose Manchin and even Heitkamp and maybe one or two more without enabling them to break the filibuster. So it's a thing to watch out for. What else do you need to watch out for? The Thursday after show, the Thank God It's Joe Vidi version of the show. I get to say that again. I missed that last Thursday. The FBI's probe of Russian subversion expands to the continuing threats against the D.C. family restaurant targeted in Pizzagate. Wow. The U.S. Treasury is investigating Paul Manafort's shadowy Cyprus bank transactions as well, including the bank recently headed by Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. Woo! And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson reveals a terrifying lack of knowledge about diplomacy and his own public responsibility. That guy is in way over his head.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Stay tuned, too, for their programming on the last half. They'll be reporting that Labor Secretary nominee Alexander Acosta refused to testify under oath whether companies should be prevented from poisoning its workers. And while Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch was testifying before the Judiciary Committee, the Supreme Court unanimously overruled him. Stay tuned for all that next.